Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to FGCU Storytelling. Yay! So we just had a classroom visit with Kim Weitkamp. So students, how was she? All right. So tonight she's going to do a set of stories called Roots of Compassion and Kindness. And I thought I'd tell you about something that happened last summer. I have an Uncle Lenny, and he came to visit with his grandson, Joseph, and they were having a conversation. And I realized something. My Uncle Lenny is a storyteller in the family, and he believes what Kim Weitkamp believes, that if you deliver a story into somebody, you can change their beliefs, their actions, and their behaviors. And so he was telling stories to his grandson. I'm in earshot. I'm just listening to this conversation. Now, it's not as formal as in here where we set up a story space. And isn't the space great? We have the Wasmer Art Gallery here. And they open the space in the evening for us. How many people the first time here? Oh, yay! So welcome to the space. Come back and look at the art. If you go out the doors and to the left, you'll find the bathroom and the water fountain if you need something to pop out between. Let's see, anything else about the space? I think that's it. Oh, yes, there is one more really important thing about storytelling space. You know, we want to pay attention, not distract each other. And there are these little devices that you have in your pocket. If you could turn them off, put them on vibrate, slip them into a pocket, and come together in conversation for the storytelling space. So my Uncle Lenny and his grandson Joseph are in conversation, their story space. And my Uncle Lenny's delivering a story into his grandson, and he says, you know, Uncle Joel is a doctor. And I'm listening in earshot, and I'm sort of smiling because I know what he's doing. You know, he's giving his grandson a little message about, like, what he can become and who's in the family. And I feel myself grow in estimation as he looks up at me and says, oh. And it's not really that much. It's because both his parents are doctors. So now I'm equal with his doctor, because his parents, because he just knows me as Uncle Joel. I'm wearing shorts. I'm in Florida, and we're on a beach vacation. And then my uncle says, and you know, Dr. Joel is a professor. He teaches at a university. And now Joseph looks confused, and he says, why doesn't he just have one job? And I'm smiling, I'm laughing, and my uncle's like trying to like mop this up a little because I'm in earshot. And he says, oh no, he teaches storytelling, and he has more than one. And I don't even know what he said, but I thought it was hilarious. So I'm on the phone with Kim Weitkamp arranging this, and I remember this, and I tell her, guess what I just heard my call him my nephew said. And I told her the story I just told you, and she said, oh, he should have asked, how are you so lucky to have more than one job? Well, Kim Weitkamp is what she says, a lover of humans, a lover of people. And in the genre of storytelling that we celebrate as professional storytellers, that is what we do. We're not on stage to just talk about ourselves or anything we want, because that would be therapy. We're here to deliver a message to you, and a message that says we love you, a message that says hope, and for today, our theme, a message of compassion and kindness. And so that's the type of professional storyteller and the type of human that Kimberly Weitkamp is. But she's also a singer, a songwriter, a humorist. She's a consultant for corporations and nonprofits on the power of story and applying story to getting their message out. She's worked with adjudicated youth, she was just telling us about, using applied storytelling for therapeutic purposes. She has done so much work with story, and she says, I have an ADD brain. I just have to do more than one thing. And everything she does is marvelous. Everything is amazing. I'm just scratching the surface of the 20 million things she's done to get her to this part of her journey. She's been a pastor for 20 years, and she's come to all of those things, but she's still a professional storyteller. She's here on tour in Florida, And today I want to thank a few people. One is Maria Roca here is representing the Roots of Compassion and Kindness Center here at the university. A round of applause for them for their support. The Seidler Foundation for their support as well of the arts and our storytellers and our reception today. So a round of applause for them. And finally, the one thing I love that Kim Weitkamp does, she knits. She loves to knit. She even had a knitting store. This is fantastic. So of all the things I want to say, please help me welcome the wonderful, kind, warm Kim Weitkamp. You'll feel her love from the stage.
Story I told about the man at the beach. Are you comfortable if I tell that again? Because it matches the kindness of this, but I am doing a whole other new one too. You okay with that? I'll give you your money back since you had to listen twice. Oh wait, it's free, yeah. So when I was a little girl, I was sitting in elementary school, and I was sitting at my wooden metal desk, you know, just chilling out, and it was health class, Mrs. Stein. And every Friday she asked us the same thing. Is there anything going on in your life that you want to talk about? And Tom Miles, 3 seats up, 1 row over, raised his hand. And he said, my parents are getting a divorce. Now listen, in 1975, huge deal. I know now, we blink, and we're like, well, there it is. But the thing is, even though it is become a normal thing, it still hurts and becomes a mile marker in our life. Talked to a young man yesterday, and the first thing he says was, well, when my parents got divorced, doesn't matter that it happens more, it's still deep and wounding. And I can remember sitting there in that seat, listening to Tom talk about it and how he didn't know what he was going to do. And I looked down and thought, I can almost feel like I'm back in that desk when I shut my eyes and see this. I can remember specifically thinking, I am so happy about my family. There was a mom, a dad, 2 brothers, me, a sister, and a dog. Right out of a little storybook. Little tiny chocolate box-sized house, nothing real big, but we had enough, okay? My dad was a tough guy, a little hard on us, but I knew he loved us, you know? And my heart just went out to Tom, and I thought, how terrible. Peggy, right? Can we just stop a minute? What are you doing here? Oh, no way. This is my friend from Ohio, and I kept looking at you going, God, she looks like Peggy. And I'm like, what in the heck? And I'm like, it is Peggy. Are you down? Are you like a snowbird? And I didn't know it. Ah, well, hey, thanks for coming. It's good to see you. Wow, that's pretty cool. That's my knitting buddy. We both fidget spin together, don't we? So, anyways, that was my thought process. It broke my heart. And I, at that moment, felt so grateful that my family was woven together tightly, solid, right? Fast forward, it's middle school. I am a redhead. As I've gotten older, it's naturally turned blonde. But I am a redhead. I was a wild child. Every report card said if Kimmy would apply herself, if Kimmy wouldn't talk so much, if Kimmy would entertain her work as much as she tries to entertain the class. I got kicked out of chorus for not conforming. Okay, that's bad. Chorus, they're dying for people to come in there. I mean, it wasn't good. And I was just coming into that time of angst and looking for any excuse to rebel against my parents when something pretty heavy happened. My dad was on a trucking run. He drove truck for a while. My brother Gary had entered the military, and my brother Chris had gone off to college. They're older than I am, much older. And my mom and I were home alone. My little sister was somewhere else, and this never happened. My little sister was always around. And my mom said, Kimmy, come in the kitchen. I want to talk to you. So I went into the kitchen, and she was sitting at the little kitchen table that had like, it was a vinyl tablecloth with chickens on it. And in front of her was a photo album, thick photo album. And she said, honey, there's something I need to tell you. And I said, okay. And she said, when I met your daddy, when I met your daddy, I already had 2 little boys. And I said, what? She said, when I met your daddy, I already had 2 little boys, your brothers, Gary and Chris. The first thing that I felt was actually concern for my mom. My mom is a saint. Bruises on her knees from praying, which I don't care what your beliefs are. I know she prayed me out of death. Because when I hit my 17 to 20, I should have been dead a couple times. And I know it's because of my mother I wasn't. So I immediately felt concerned for her because my mother prided herself on being a very moral, strong woman. And here she was telling me, right, not even that old, her past secrets. And so the first thing I said to her was it's okay, Mom. We're a good family. And I love my brothers. It's okay. They're my half-brothers. It's not a big deal. It's okay, whatever happened. She goes, well, I want to explain what happened. And she opens the photo album, and the very first picture, nice big one, right on the first page, is my mother, who's 87 today. I thought she was 89. She about came through the phone and smacked me. She's 87 today, is still a stunner. I picked her up not long ago, and she came out, and she had on a waist cropped sweater that was pink and fuzzy, and skinny jeans and these ankle boots. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I'm wearing fuddy clothes and a shirt that says Optimist. And I'm like, when you feel uncool next to your 80-plus-year-old mother, you know you need to do some changes and see a stylist. But anyways, that's not part of the story. So anyways, she's a stunner. Even now, she's a stunner. 5 foot, tiny little thing. And in that picture, oh my gosh, it was a black and white photo, but it was jet black hair. You could see the lights shining off of it, laid in plaited waves. She had on a thin, waisted dress that just shot out, T-length, bouquet in her hand, and next to her was a man who not only wasn't my father, but way better looking than my father. He was Cary Grant good looking. You could pull his face out and through all of the centuries put it out there and people'd say, that's a good looking man. And I said, Mom, what the heck? And she goes, we actually won best looking couple. And we won a free wedding down at the Strand Theater in York, photographer, my dress, the whole thing. I said, no way. And she goes, yes, this is Gary. I said, the name of my brother. She said, yes, your older brother is named after my first husband, Gary. I mean, I felt like she had opened a book of Real Housewives of Orlando, I don't know, whatever, because I'm like, whoa, this whole backstory I never knew about my mother all of these years. She turns the page and there's more pictures, and then there's a little baby in her arms a few more pages in, and a few more pages in, there's my older brother as a little toddler, and then next thing you know, there's another little baby. And then the pictures begin to thin out until there's just white. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, we got married. Hi, Susan. She said, we got married, and everything was amazing. He loved me so deeply, and I loved him. When the first baby came, your brother, he was a phenomenal father. Not a problem. So much so, we enjoyed having a kid that we decided to have another kid. We both had decent jobs. I was a secretary in the head administration office for Brocker Steel, and he had a good job too. So in comes another baby. And then all of a sudden, he starts going out. And he would come home drunk. And I would just kind of say, well, he works hard, 2 kids, it's a lot, so he's drinking. He'd sleep, get up, treat me sweet, go to work. But then he started missing work. And then the drinking began to disrupt the house. And then drinking settled up next to gambling. She said, I would come home with the kids after picking them up from my mother's, who watched them whenever she had to work, and I would see him being carted away by the cops or the cops in the driveway. One time I came home, opened the front door, and all the furniture downstairs was gone. He had gambled it away, and we had just bought it. She said, the final straw for me was when he started pulling into the driveway with a woman in the car, coming in, getting some money, and walking out. The kids crying, trying to hang on to his legs because they hadn't seen him in a few days. And then when I had the cops knock on my door and literally almost knock it down because of some things he had done, and they dragged him out of the house, I thought, that's it. And so I moved in with my mother, and it was tight squeeze, sold the house, then got a house where my mother and I and the kids could be somewhat comfortable, still small, and I divorced him. And that's how, when I met your dad, I already had 2 little boys. I was like, wow, my mind is blown. I said, Gary and Chris know this. She goes, of course they do. They're old enough that they remember. She said, Chris, not so much. He remembers, but Gary remembers. Because after their dad got put in jail for actually a pretty long time because of something he did, Gary became the man of the house at that young age. And he would get Chris off the bus and walk him into the house and watch him till I could get home from work if my mother wasn't available. And I said, boy, we had a little conversation about it. We flipped through the photo album a little bit. I asked some more questions. And she said, well, there's something else, honey, that I need to tell you. I was like, okay, nothing's going to beat this. I mean, this is going down in history. And she said, well, when I met your daddy, he had a little girl. I said, no way. I said, what happened to her? And she said, honey, she said it was you. So now I sat there, click, 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 click. My brothers aren't my stepbrothers. They're my half-brothers. They're my stepbrother. My sister's not my sister. She's my half-sister. No. Yeah, she's my half. Oh, my grandmother is not my grandmother. You are not my mother. My father has been lying to me. My pap is not my pap. And the first thing I said was, who knows? And she said, everybody knows but your sister. She's too little. And I felt like the biggest joke on record. Everybody knew but me all this time. When we would play as kids, my brother Gary would get irritated with me. He's always been irritated with me. And now I understand why, because I busted into his world, busted all of his toys, and disrupted the flow of that little family. But he would get mad at me and say, you're adopted. And my brother Chris would go, no, you're not. Stop it, Gary. And that played in my head at that moment. I'm like, oh my God, it was true. I'm adopted. This is not my family. My dad is my family. My sister's somewhat my family. But all of you are not my mother. And I began to bawl. There I am, a preteen trying to be cool. And I lost it. I cried until, have you ever cried until you kind of go, and you can't even get any air up in the top of your head? My head was pounding, snot coming out on my nose, down my lip. I could not breathe. My mom reached over to grab me, and I said, no. And she reached over and grabbed me, and that tiny little woman pulled me onto her lap. I was thinner then. Pulled me onto her lap and rocked me while I continued to sob. And then I went to bed, fell asleep, and woke up the next day really angry and really confused. The only thing I can say is that it was like somebody had taken and cut me right down the middle, like surgery was going to happen. And then they opened it up and said, hey, look, everything you thought you were, everything you thought you were rooted into was a joke. And there's nothing there. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who my mother was. What parts of me were my mother? Why did she get rid of me? That day, my mom sat me down, I with my arms crossed, her looking at me with pity and compassion, and said, look, I need to explain to you what happened. And I said, why isn't Dad telling me this story? Just to say, this perfect little vision of a family that you have, but I told him sooner or later, with all the cousins and uncles and even your brothers, you're going to find out. And I said, well, then what happened? What's the story with Dad? And she said, somewhat similar to mine. He had moved down to Kentucky to go to military school and met a woman named Linda. She was beautiful. Strawberry red hair, very fair, very thin, came from an extremely wealthy family. And she had a little boy. Her mother, and even Linda herself, said he was no good, that she'd left with the boy. My father fell in love with her very quickly. She was funny. and kind and sweet. And they got married, and he took that little boy on as if it was his own. And soon they had me. And not long after that, he realized my mother had been drinking. He drove truck. He didn't know. He'd come home and they'd say, you know, not only now is she bringing Danny to the bar down the street, but she's bringing the newborn baby to the bar and putting her on the bar, and we watch the baby while she drinks. And sometimes she comes in here without the baby and you're not with her. And we don't know where the baby is. It's funny because years later, something happened and I found out that she would leave me with Danny, who was only like 6 years old. And there's a funny story with that coming, and I'm laughing about it right now. And that's kind of digressing, but sorry, I just saw the whole picture in my mind, and you'll know why I think it's funny later. Sorry. Whatever. That's not really how I tell a story, but it just popped out there and it made me chuckle. So, my father found out that she was drinking. He did a little more research and found out that the whole family had kept from him that she was a drinker, a really heavy drinker. She actually drank the whole time I was pregnant. He put that together by talking to other people, and he started doing a lot of research and found out she drank all the time. She had issues with money, spent lots of money, tons of things in the basement with tags that she never even wore, just lots and lots of issues that her mother had covered for many years, and really hoped after meeting my dad, a good, strong military man who had never been married before and was looking for a good wife, had really hoped maybe this time it'll straighten her up. But it did not. And when I was not quite 2 months old, she did it again, left me at the sitters this time, not the bar, and took off with Danny, and my father came home from being on 2 weeks, and your wife has not come back. My father found out the address, went into the master bedroom, and realized all her clothing were gone, all of Danny's clothing were gone, and she had left. Probably, we don't know, with another man. So he picked me up and then began our journey. My dad, not having any clue what to do with me, never quite trying to figure it out, using the same sitter, thank God, he had some help that he could work. And so on it went, and at his job at Brocker Steel, he used to go in, he kind of was over a lot of the stuff with the fleet. He would go in to get his paycheck, and there was a very attractive woman with jet black hair that shined under the lights of the office. A tiny little figure and sweet as could be. And they started talking, and one day he brought me in and she said, "Oh, you have a little girl. I would love to have a little girl." And he said, "Well, you're always talking about your 2 boys. I'd love to have 2 boys." And she said, "Well, I'm taking them to baseball this weekend on Saturday if you want to come along." And he said, "I'll do you one better. Why don't you let me take your boys to ball practice and you take my little girl?" So they swapped kids. They swapped kids every Saturday. My mom said they would get so excited when he would show up. She's like, "You were just this adorable little redheaded baby, and we would get you and we'd clean all your clothing, do all your laundry because everything was stained. He didn't know how to clean it. We'd clean you up really good, give you baths, brush your hair, put in little clip bows, put on a bonnet, walk you in the stroller. We used to like to sew you clothing." And he would take the boys, take them to baseball, out for ice cream, holler out, good eye, and they were both being very fulfilled. And then one day, he came by on a Saturday to swap kids. And she had told him that week that she had a new license plate that had come in, and he said, "I'll help you put your license plate on." They were both squatting down by the back fender, and she was holding the screws that put on the license plate, and he was working on it when he stopped, rested his arm on his leg, and said, "You know, what are we doing?" And she said, "I don't know." And he said, "You know, this has been going on for almost a year." And he said, "Why don't we get married?" And she said, "Okay." So they put the license plate on, went in, talked to her mother and said, "Would you watch all the kids so we can go to Virginia and get married?" And she said, "Yes, 100%. So off they went to Winchester, Virginia. They paid the fee, were married right there in the office, went through Luray Caverns, went to the movies and saw Dr. Zhivago, went home. He moved in, didn't have to sell anything. It was rented, and moved into that house with her, her mother, and all the kids, and thus it began until the day he died. So my mom told me that story, and I'm like, okay, awesome. Now there's some story spokes I can hang on to. That's for my class, right? It's beautiful. But the question still remains. Why did she leave me and take Danny? Was I that unattractive as a baby? Oh, the stories we tell each other. Was I that bad of a baby that she chose to dump me and take the other kid? So she drank. Was I not enough for her to take and at least drag me along on her journey? I wrestled with this for so long. I even hit a point where I tried to find my mother. Both of my parents said, if you want to find her, that's your business. Well, there was no Google. There was no search that I could pay $2.99 a month for. There was no thing to spit in to find out my DNA and how it ran and who it ran to. And so I did what we did back then. I'd pick up the phone, which was corded, attached to the wall, and I would dial 411. But what you could do is you could put in the area code and then the operator number, and you could call each state's operator. And I would say, I'm looking for a woman named Linda Winters. I went from Kentucky to Kansas to Texas because I heard that Danny's dad lived in Texas. And I did that, and I would get women named Linda Winters. And I would say, hey, it's kind of odd, but I found out that, my birth mother had abandoned me, and I'm trying to find her. Your name's Linda Winters, and I am just asking. I'm not going to ask anything of you. I'm just trying to find her to see if she's okay and maybe ask a few questions. And I would always get, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh. And there was this one woman, she was a lawyer, and she said, I am so sorry, I am not your mother. She's like, I am a lawyer, I am single, divorced, and I have a daughter, and if you were my daughter, I'd tell you. And I was like, wow, a lawyer, I wish you were my mom. Paid college. And so it went on like that until I finally gave it up. I just decided to let it go. Now I'm telling this story mainly for the class because I want them to understand the power of a story to heal. And that's where we're going to head. I was 30 years old when the phone rang on the college apartment wall. And I walked over to it and picked it up, and a guy said, is this Kimberly Givler, my maiden name? And I said, is this Danny? And he said, this is Danny. How did you know it was me? We'd never met. I said, I've seen your pictures. My dad, after I found everything out, brought pictures out, and I saw pictures of you and him, and I knew one day you'd call me, and I heard your voice, and I knew that you were my brother. And he said, well, I'm trying to get hold of you because Linda's dying. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, I have the power in this situation. I have the right, because she abandoned me, to hold the power. And I'm not going to want you to give her my number. Don't give her my number. But I'll take her number, and when I feel ready, maybe I'll call her. And he said, please do, because she's wanting to talk to all her children before she dies. And I said, what? And he said, well, first she had Craig, and then she abandoned him with his dad. I know, right? It's like Snapchat, like those really weird stories on Snapchat, except nobody dies, right? She's like, first she had Craig, and then she abandoned him with his father. Then she had Ursula. Before the Little Mermaid, we still feel bad for her. Then she had Ursula, and then abandoned her with her father. And then she had Danny, and took him with her because that man was locked up in Texas, and met your father, and then had you, and then abandoned you, and then took Danny to Texas, me, and left me with my father. And then she moved up west into the Seattle area and had Amy, Angie, Anika, and Amber. So there's 9 of us. And I was like, what? Oh my gosh. I was like, I have that many half-brothers and sisters. Wow. And he's like, yeah, and she's dying. And she wants to know that each of her children are okay and would like to talk to them. So I got her number, and I put it on the table, the little dining room table, and I walked by it on a regular basis. And I thought to myself, open the door or keep the door shut. I had a great family. We're tight. I like my siblings. We're good. I'm married. I got 2 kids. I'm happy. Do I want to open the door to all these humans? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to call her. I had questions like, what's the deal with my middle name? My first name is Kimberly. What do you think my middle name is? Anne? That's what everybody always thinks. That's good. It's Lane, like Lane, like a street. And I've always wanted to know why my middle name's Lane, because even my dad didn't know. And I thought, even if that's all I can find out, that's cool. But who knows? We might actually kind of click. And I don't need a mother, but maybe we could even be friendly. She's dying, right? So I called, and she picked up the phone, and I said, hello. She said, hello. And I said, hello. I said, this is Kimberly, your daughter. And she goes, oh, my sweet honey. Ugh. That's like kind of creeper, right? I don't know you. I mean, granted, she gave birth to me, but I don't know you, and you're calling me like sweet names. That was weird to me. And I said, well, listen, I said, I'm not asking for anything, and I have a mother, just so that we're square on that. I'm not looking for you to be my mom, but we could be friends. But I have one rule, and the rule is this: not one negative word about my father. I'm at an age that I know where he lacks. But he cared for me, he stuck by me, and he's still sticking by me, and I don't need you to say anything negative about him. So off we go into the conversation. We're in 2-3 minutes, and she starts to say, you know, your father took you from me. I have so much to prove otherwise. Then she said, I hired a private investigator to find you. We lived in the same place our whole life. He ended up owning Lester L. Givler Tire Company in Arco Station. All she had to do was look him up in the phone book. And I said, I'm sorry, you've broken the rule. I have to go. And I hung up on her. Because I had the power in that situation. I had the right to have the power in that situation. So I tried again 3 months later, because I thought she's dying. And Danny and I had been talking a lot, and he told me a story about how, even though he was small, he could remember her going to the bar. And she'd say, I'm going to go down to the bar. It's only a block away if something happens. And he would lay me on the bed with a bottle and try and hold it so I could drink. And he's like, you were really little. I'm like, oh, yeah. I was not even like 3-4 months old yet. And he said, sometimes, and this explains why there's a lot wrong with me in my head, right? Because he said, when you'd cry, I would jump on the bed so you'd fly in the air and you'd stop crying. And I'm like, Danny, you understand that wasn't because it felt good, right? I was a newborn. I had no bones. I was like flopping, flipping everywhere. And I'm like, and he's like, yeah, I look back now. I'm like, probably not the best babysitting thing, right? He's like, I got kids of my own. And I still think that's hilarious. But it worked, and it shut me up, and that's all he cared about as a toddler. So we had become close. And he even came to see me. And I knew who he was the minute I saw him. It was instant. Absolute instant connection. So because he really wanted us to have some kind of a relationship, no matter how light, I tried again, and she did the same thing again, and that was it. And she died. I got a 23andMe kit for Christmas. I wanted to spit it and see who I was. My dad had no clue what my mom was made of. In my family, my children, my grandchildren, I have Cubans, I have mixed race, black, beautiful, creamy, oh my God, they're beautiful red afros, deep dark eyes, caramel skin, sassy little Cuban, bright red lip, little thing, puts her hand on her hip, and she's never met her father, and neither have they. So I know how DNA can shape you, and I needed to find out who I was. So I spit in the tube, sent it off the day after Christmas, and it came back. Scandinavian, French, and Irish, and German. I was like, oh, that feels about right. Scandinavian, I burn in the sun. My daughters have piercing blue eyes. Irish, I love a good drink, a loud room, and good stories. All of these things and stereotypes you put with it. I'm like, okay, I'm learning a little bit about who I am. I knew what my dad does, so I knew that this comes from my mother. I connected with a few of the 9 sisters. We call them the A sisters, Danny and I found out that my mother had a very artistic bent, and even drunk, and even in all the issues and horrible relationships, if you needed a shirt, she'd take it right off and give it to you. So I held on to those spokes right? I chose not to stand on the story spokes of alcoholism, abuse, and abandonment, but instead stand on the spokes about giving and artistry. Yeah, well, Facebook came along. Good old Facebook. I remember when Facebook first opened, Mark Zuckerberg asked to be my friend, and I was like, I don't know you. Now I'm like, dude, I should have totally said yes. You need to hire me. Anyways, and through Facebook, and I don't even know how it happened, this girl, Shelley Washburn, and I crossed paths. And to this day, we ask each other, do you remember? I don't remember. This is weird. I have no idea. And we were cousins. And I found out that she did all kinds of genealogy, and she said, your grandmother married a Washburn, and your mother is from the Washburn family. I'm like, no way. She's like, yeah. She said, I got all kinds of stuff, and I'll start sending it to you. Oh, the power of a story. My whole life, from the day I found out, I had hate towards her. And I'm not a hateful person. But why in the world could she leave me? When I had my first baby, I was laying in the hospital bed, blanket down, my little new beautiful freaking baby wrapped up, laying there between my legs, and I wept over her thinking, I've known her one day, and I can't leave her and even put her in the freaking nursery. How could she have done this? The hate continued to rise. All of these thoughts about myself that infiltrated my mind. So much anger towards her in so many ways. One day I was sitting at my desk at my job. I was the assistant to the chief of police and the director of Homeland Security for the county. And it was just a sabbatical time for me. I left working with adjudicated youth and wanted something easy. No joke. It was so easy. They kept going, oh, we know this is hard. I'm like, this is not hard. This is awesome. I leave at 4, and you don't call me to come pick up a cop who's been completely beaten and left alone in his underwear in the backyard, and he has to come live at my house for a few days. This is nothing. I can handle this. And they're like, well, we have to teach you to use a gun, and you're going to have access to a private area with a fax machine, and any threats that come into the country, you're going to see them, and you can't tell anybody. And if anybody tries to get the info from you, are you going to be able to handle it? And I'm like, you do understand that if they bend my finger and offer me a brownie, I'm telling them everything. And the chief said, well, at least you know your boundaries. So that's the job I was working. And I'm sitting there, and an email came in from Shelley. Back then, all your emails came to your work email because we didn't have separate, so old school. I rode a donkey to work. And I'm sitting there, and I get a message from Shelley. And I'm like, oh, gosh, there's an attachment. What is it? And she had written, you probably already know this, but I thought maybe you'd like to see the pictures. I found some pictures. And I'm like, what in the world? And so down it comes. It was horrific times, children. Here comes the picture. It's downloading. I went and had lunch, came back. It's almost there, And there's a picture of a nun. And she's holding a little baby. And there are 4 children around her on either side, 2 and 2, right? And on this side, there's a little girl. They're all in their underwear. This little girl has on her underwear. Her belly is distended. When new puppies that are left to wander, they have big bellies. You're like, how cute. It's worms. Like, I could tell by looking at that picture. It wasn't like, oh, how cute. Look at her big belly. It was distended. Hunger. Her hair was chopped at all different levels. Really weird. And it said, 5 Washburn children abandoned at gas station. And Children's Services had already moved them from the house several times. This time, the attendant said, car pulls up, all the kids get out, a newborn baby is put into the arms of the little girl on the far left, and the car left. It's the Washburns again. This time, they stayed at the orphanage with the nuns until families from far and wide around the region heard about it, who knew each other and were very wealthy. And they decided to adopt those children, change their names, and those children never saw each other again. Brutally mean, in my opinion. But that is how she sent me that. So I called her, and I'm like, Shelley, I said, I don't understand. I don't know who these people are. What Washburns are there? There's a lot of Washburns. She goes, Kim, that's your mother. And I said, no, it's not. I said, it doesn't say, my mother's name is not on there. And she goes, no, the little girl on the left, the one with the distended belly, K. Annie Washburn. She said, that's your mother. I said, what? I said, I'm not computing this. She goes, your grandmother had 5 children. They were drinkers, her and her husband. And she abandoned those kids several times, but this time was for good. She shoved them out of the door and took off and never came back. And I'm sitting in that seat, in that office. And this is a story that was not purposely edited for me. It did not even come out of a human mouth, which it could have. And in an instant, all the anger and all the hate I felt, 30 years of therapy in one moment, and I'm not against therapy. I think it's like if you take care of your car, you should take care of yourself, right? But instant, I kept looking at that little girl, and then another picture came in, and it was a picture of the 4 of them pulling a baby in a wagon, and then she sent me a picture of a convenience store called the Big Apple that had a top shaped like an apple, and then she put more information. People in the town have said that those kids were always seen around town carting around the baby or carting around the other kids when they were younger, and they'd go down and they'd ask for food because they never had food, and people would even give them food, and sometimes people would take them in, and then one of the parents would come back and say, I want my kids back, and then they go. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, she'd been abandoned too. Not only was she abandoned, she was shoved out of a car, and her newborn sibling was shoved into her arms and then put in an orphanage, clinging to her brothers and sisters, ripped apart to never see them again, and not even know their names to find them. I'm a storyteller. I talk about using story to heal, and in that moment, I truly understood the power of a story. Did it make what she did right? No, not at all. I know many alcoholics that try and work hard to overcome that and still care for their children. By forgiving her, I did not condone her behavior, but I understood it. And by understanding it, I felt it. And by feeling it, I had empathy. And through empathy, I forgave her in that moment without even saying, I forgive you. Just like that. I understood that she was searching for her place, thinking that this man, no matter what he said, would be her ticket to a normal life. And then when that wasn't working, maybe the baby could be the ticket to my normal life, and I'll be different than what I remember. But she was stuck in a story groove of belief about herself and the love she deserved, and kept repeating over and 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 over again the same scenario. And so I forgave her. She's already gone. So I called my sister Ursula, and I'm like, hey, I said, I understand that you've got Linda's stuff. She's like, I do. And I don't talk to those sisters very often, maybe once a year. We're all good. I said, is there anything in there I can have? I've never wanted anything of hers before, but I found some things out. And I shared it all with Danny and my sisters, told them all of the stories. They were mind blown. And then Shelley contacts me and says, hey, I've got more information. Your mother abandoned 9 children. Her mother abandoned 5. Her mother abandoned 9. Her mother abandoned 12. Alcohol, 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 alcohol. So I said to Ursula, I really want something of hers. Because not only did she have to fight all that she dealt with, but DNA. And she said, I have the perfect thing for you. I'm going to send it to you. Well, it arrived about a week later, and the box, I could smell the cigarette smoke already. When I cut the tape and opened it, it was like, poof, Marlboro City. But there was no good-looking cowboy or horse. I don't know if you remember that or not. And I looked in it and could not believe what I saw. It was a Bible. It was in one of those zipper things with a handle, And I pulled it out, and it was so heavy, and it was thick. And I unzipped it and opened it, pulled it out, and the Bible itself was hardcover, 3 different versions, and duct taped all over. And so I dropped it onto the table, and I thought, well, there it is. So that's what she gave me. Okay. I moved around that day, and then I decided, and it's going to get weird, but this is a true story, and there's nothing I can do about it. I took the Bible, put it back in the zipper case at the end of the day. I kind of flicked through it, saw a bunch of writing in it, whatever. Well, I'm a nester. I've already nested at Joel's. I have a seat at the table in that front dining room, and I have all my stuff, all my little bags, my little drink. I'm a nester. And I have a space when we lived in this house where I nested. That's where I put my stuff. Comfy, place for my drink, little basket where I keep my books and magazines. Do you understand that? We do that, right? And I took the Bible and dropped it into the basket. And my little dog, Tika, tiny little papillon, had a bed right there, and she loved it because she could see when people came in through the bathroom from outside. She could see when someone was coming in from the dining room, and she could see me. She loved me, right? I love that dog. Suddenly, she started sitting between me and the basket, and she'd stare at it and growl at it. And I thought, cigarettes. None of us smoked. It's freaking her out. So I took the Bible, and I had this dresser in my bedroom, and it was really cool because it looked like beautiful carved wood, but it actually pulled out, and it was like a secret drawer, right? I love that kind of stuff. So I put it in there and shoved it. And my dog, who always slept at the bottom of the bed on the floor in this nice dog bed, started sleeping between me and the dresser. And when I'd shower, she always was on that memory foam kind of mat thing, but she started sleeping by the door where she could see the dresser. And I'm like, man, that smoke is really getting to her. And so then I thought, I'm going to put it way up in the closet in my office. So I put it on the 3rd shelf up, shut the closet door. And Tika always slept under the desk on my feet, which is awesome. She warmed them. It was so sweet. Suddenly, she starts sleeping between the desk and the closet. And sometimes she'd look up at nothing and growl. And I started getting freaked out. I'm like, what is going on? So one day when I was home alone, I got the Bible out, put the Bible on the dining room table, saged the house. Everyone should have sage, right? Saged all the corners, sat down and thought, let me just go through this. So I opened it, and the notes on the pages were not scriptural Sunday school notes. It was a diary. It was a diary of her battle with alcoholism. It was a diary of what she wondered her kids looked like, lamenting of how she could never, ever beat the demon, her exact words. And I remember that day shutting that book, and I said out loud, my story, don't care what you believe, my story, right? Not trying to offend anybody. I said out loud, Linda, you weren't here for me when you were living. I'm fine. I don't need you here now. I forgive you. I've already forgiven you. A couple years ago, I forgave you. It's okay. You can go. I'd like to say the windows shook and pictures flew off the wall and like dishes came out of the cover, because although I'd probably pee my pants, I would love to have had that experience. But it didn't. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. So I took the Bible and I put it back in the basket. And I went to get ready for the family to come home and all that good stuff. And I thought, I'm going to shower real quick. And I'm in the shower and I start bawling like a baby. She probably never heard me. How ridiculous are you? Talking out loud to your dead birth mother. And in the shower in that moment, I really made a stupid request. I said out loud, because I talk out loud all the time. Joe has even said to me several times, what? And I'm like, it's not about you. It's all for me. I said, here's the deal. If you heard me, I want to see a hummingbird. So stupid. It's like a Hallmark movie. And then I started to laugh, because I was like, how ridiculous is that? It's winter. And I kind of made fun of myself a little bit, like, get over it. You did what you could do. It's finished. You have something of hers, whatever. I get out, I get done, I throw on some sweatpants and a t-shirt. I go out, and there's mail on the table. And I picked up the mail, straightened it, to move it to the kitchen bar so I could set the table, and a little square of paper came out and floated to the ground. I still have goosebumps. I'm standing here right now freaking a little. And I walked over and picked it up. And you know when you buy a card, you sometimes get a gold seal? It was a hummingbird. It was a freaking sticker with a hummingbird. And I was like, she heard me. I peeled it off, went in and got the Bible, stuck it in the front, zipped it up, and my dog always was in her bed from that day on. It is amazing to me how much that little story that was sent to me through a computer helped me move into pure forgiveness and understanding. The part that I take ownership for is that I wish, in hindsight, I would have ignored the things she said about my father that maybe she even grew to believe in some of her mental illness and her sickness. I wish I would have overlooked that and just said, tell me your story. Don't tell me our story. We don't have one. Tell me your story. I wish I could have heard that from her mouth and had her hear the words, I understand and I forgive you. You were still wrong, but I forgive you. To me, it's devastating that I had to wait till she was gone and look at a piece of newspaper on a computer screen. Taking the time to listen to other stories when you feel wronged at that intersection. Remember today we talked? The story of you and that human, and then whatever's happening, that intersection where there's pain, can help you understand and give mercy and forgiveness, not condonement. And if they try and twist you into condonement, they're a manipulator, you need to exit immediately. But hearing someone's story absolutely can bring healing and forgiveness and understanding. It is a powerful, powerful thing. Now flip it. You know someone that's hurting. What stories do you have without making it about you that you can say, listen, I understand because one time. And I'm not taking away from what you're feeling. I just want you to know I'm with you, even though it's a different recipe, same product. Healing, connection. One of the reasons I choose to be an open book in my life and answer any question someone gives me is because the biggest lie that we believe, sorry, I'm not supposed to get emotional when you're on stage, and one of my heroes is here, she's going, is that we think we're alone. Anything you're dealing with right now in this moment in your seat, whether it was today, this week, last month, I have a story that has the same result. The stories are different, the recipe's different, but the bottom line is it's the same things. Is it anger? Is it loss? Is it abandonment? Betrayal? Humiliation? Not feeling worthy? Whatever it is you're dealing with, I can guarantee if we made an open mic tonight and said, hey, Phil back there is dealing with feeling betrayed. Let's do stories of betrayal. And 2 hours later, Joe will go, hey, listen, I hate to break this up, but it's getting late. You're not alone. Not only can it help you heal, but it can help you heal others. And so there's my story for tonight. And is that good, Joel? Right? Okay. Okay. Whew, I'm tired. So we have time for a little bit of Q&A, correct? Okay. So I'd love it if you had any questions. You have any questions you want to ask about that or the use of story or? Yes.
That if something flashed for you.
Yeah, me bouncing on the bed while he
And-
jumped.
is that it? Oh, that
my
was-
gosh,
okay.
that visual, I always try and not let it crack me up when I'm telling the story, but sometimes it hits so hard of me flailing like a rubber band at like a little newborn, like flailing up it. That's funny. Like, I'm not mad about that. That's hilarious. He was only doing the best he could with what he had, right? At least he didn't like give me whiskey or something. Any questions? Anything. It doesn't have to be about that. It can be anything.
How did you get into storytelling? Like, how did your life lead here?
My mom said I came out telling stories. So my early beginning in storytelling was telling stories to not get in trouble. You would call it lying. I call it really creative storytelling. I was always getting in trouble, and I would come up with the most amazing stories. Sometimes my mom would say, "How was school today?" And it was so boring, so I'd make things up. In history, when we got points for news items that we'd read, I'd totally make up news items, and I finally got busted on a whole thing about Play-Doh poisoning children. He's like, "Kim, I know you're making these up," and I was like, "I pushed it too far." I just always loved making stories up, and I did not know, unbeknownst to me, I had been a storyteller without knowing it in all of my work, especially when I got into adjudicated youth work and working with teenagers and at-risk teenagers. I got the nickname Story Lady, which in our realm, we don't want to be called Story Lady, right? That's like, I don't want to be Story Lady. It's like a Mother Goose thing. But it was like a joke. They called me the Story Lady because I taught through story. When we did their counseling, I would use stories so they could, we talked about this today, talk about their issues indirectly so they wouldn't get defensive. We'd use stories to help them learn during their community service when we'd be cleaning out barrels or cleaning off the skate ramps or whatever. I would use story, or my team would use story. So I did that. And then I left that because I was worn out. I was running 36 nonprofits. I had my own center. So I was like schmoozing all the people while writing grants, while taking care of my teams, while helping other people who were running their centers, while doing emergency foster care, while helping my own kids that were in my center. And I just was done. So I took a job, the first one that popped up, which was with the chief of police. I loved that job. I would have died if I stayed. It's not enough creativity, but I loved it. And it was for a purpose, actually, because the Virginia Tech massacre happened while I was there. And that's a story that I would talk about another time, because I was the one that got to be in the chief's office and listen to the sergeant and the chief as they went into that situation, because we were the only, the police on Virginia Tech had followed a wrong lead from some kids in the dorm, so they were off campus thinking they were following the shooter while he was chaining the doors, and then we were the only ones with the battering ram that would work, and we were only 10 minutes away, and so life is so amazing. So that all went down. I heard the most horrible things, just horrible, as they went in. And when I left that job, because I was doing storytelling like in my region and on the East Coast and stuff, I left because I had enough gigs. I had to make a decision. And this person at Virginia Tech who had heard me talk about the healing power of stories to heal communities called me and said, "We want to send a bunch of the kids that survived the massacre. We want them to learn how to shape their story and tell it, and we're going to send them around the world to talk about campus safety as well as the whole effect of that experience and the power of survival, the guilt of survival." And I'm like, well, that's really weird, because guess what? I was there listening to the phones ring as parents tried to call students, and that's all you heard was hundreds of ringing. Like, I have major connection to this, so cool. So anyways, a friend of mine told me about the International Storytelling Center. I was out in San Francisco at a leadership conference speaking. She's like, "You should be a storyteller." I'm like, "I already am." She goes, "No, this is what it is." She told me about the International Storytelling Festival. I went down and found my tribe, knew it was what I was called to do. I already had a lot under my belt for storytelling, set a goal of 2 years to be on that stage. In 2 years, I was on that stage, and then now here I am doing what I do. So, yeah. Is that good? Okay. And now I have ghost story albums, and I have a new fairy tale album coming up, and I love all kinds of stories, you know. But it's your story I love the most, sincerely. It's the most powerful story there is, not what I'm writing. Anybody? Yes, ma'am?
So you're talking about the theme of storytelling is healing, and right now it's a very difficult time. Yep. And I've had a number of cases already just in the first few weeks of the semester of students crying in my classes because they hurt so much and are so scared. How can we use storytelling to heal what we're dealing with right now?
It is so scary, isn't it? This may seem very trite or simple, and I'm not saying this is the right answer, but my mother-in-law, 5 years ago, what am I thinking of it, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7, 8 years ago, we were in our living room, And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And whatever you believe in, however you voted is great. I support whatever you've done. No shame. You do what you believe. I've told my kids over and over, I don't care what they believe as long as they'll die for it and stand by it. So I don't care. We could go to dinner and have complete opposing thoughts and we're cool. I'll love you no matter what. So know that before I say this. But I was weeping because I had left a man and I saw some of the same mirrored personality traits in this new person and was devastated. My mother-in-law reached over, oh, now, Kim, it'll be fine. And she said, you know how many presidents I've lived through? She named all the presidents she lived through. Then she talked about living through scarlet fever. She was born during the Dust Bowl when all the main states that produce food had nothing. She lived during times of Great Depression, through horrible presidential administrations and ridiculousness. And she said, and here I sit. And she said, it's not going to make it feel better, but just know it's not forever. And I know that seems so simple, but it's really holding me now. I'm only going to be 60 in a year. You know, I have a lot of life left to live and a lot that I can do myself, right? So that's maybe not the strongest answer for that, but that's what I hold on to, because she didn't blink an eye. Just not even blink an eye. Well, you know, here we go. I've lived through it all. She's like, I've seen astronauts walk. I forget what she said. It was so funny. She goes, astronauts walk. I lived through this. I lived through the scarlet fever. I lived through this. And I was there when Elvis was on whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, there you go. You saw Elvis on TV. We're going to make it through everything. Thank you, Elvis. But it really did impact me, though, her story of all she lived through. She's an incredible woman. But also, you know, when I work with anybody that's feeling something, I try and find a time I felt that, so then I have that empathetic universal ground, right? But then, you know, and you don't always want to tell what your story is. You just want to, right? Because you don't want to make it about yourself. But you can tell how you worked through it. If they want to hear it, are you dumping or are you asking for me to speak into your life? I usually ask that. Sometimes they just need to dump, which you know that. I know who you are, right? I've figured out who you are. So is that helpful at all? Yeah. I feel like each one's going to be such a different case. It's hard to just, yeah. So, any other questions? Anything at all? I know a lot of the students.
What is it like to be a storyteller on the road trying to make at least some of your living that way?
Yeah. That's Susan O'Halloran, and she's been doing this longer than me, and she's a queen. And does incredible work building bridges between races and things, right? So it's hard. I'm on the road a total of almost a month now, and it's hard. But the answer to that is yarn shops. Mock me if you will. In Cocoa Beach, I was feeling lonely, and I missed my girlfriends. And I found a yarn shop. There were women knitting. I walked in, and they were like, hey, how are you? I'm like, I'm great. They're like, do you live here? No, I don't. Where are you from? Ohio. Ohio. Oh, my God. What are you working on? Here's my project. Ooh, because it's a good one. It's a little, you know, little show-off project. I'm not doing it for that, but I knew they'd like ooh it because there's bobbles and color work and it's hard, right? And they're like, oh my God, that's beautiful. I'm like, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this. Who are you making it for? Oh, all the way around the table. And then someone's like, do you want a cup of tea or coffee? I'd love that. They bring it in. Whoop. We're working with our hands. We're all chill. They're talking about their life. And then I went to one in that was Cocoa Beach, and then where did I go after? Boca Raton. Oh my God, the biggest yarn shop I'd ever seen in my life. I walked in, there's a table, there's a woman knitting with another woman. I said, is this where you sit if you want to knit? They said, no, you sit here if you're making a mistake and you need help. And then an employee comes. They had like 4 freaking employees, Peggy. It was like a yarn department store. And they're like, there's 2 places you can go to knit. And I'm like, it's a Sunday, there's a lot of people here. They're like, there's at least 9 women around the corner in the kitchen, and there's some men and women. Did you know that used to be women weren't allowed to knit? It was a man's thing. We weren't even allowed to pick up the needles. And then the war happened, and they needed knitted items. So guess what? Suddenly, oh, that's lifted. And not only did we knit code into the knitting and would give it to the soldiers so they'd know things that were happening. This is when the trains come by. This is when there's a shift change. It's fascinating, right? Let us knit. Anyways, so I walked in and it was the same thing. Hey, how are you? I'm doing great. How are you? There was lots of ages, very young, college age, up to older. And I sat down. Everybody shows what they're making because that's what you do. It's kind of like when dogs sniff each other's butt in knitting. You ask, what are you making? You're like, okay, we all know each other now. That's weird. I've never said that before. And anyways, and then they started talking. There's this one woman who's 80. She was wearing a boot because she had surgery. And she's like, now I'm going to take my boot off and put it in the car. And I have a metal plate to put in my shoe so I don't bend my foot. Because I'm going down to Fishtails, the bar, and I'm listening to some live music. And I'm like, you go, girl. And it was the best time ever. And I left. I stayed 3 hours just knitting on my project because I felt such a connection to women like I do when I'm home with my people. And so making connections in a way is one way I survive on the road. 2 is the kindness of others. Joel has provided a lovely lunch today, a beautiful warm bed to sleep in, quiet space to work. And we've had a lot of fun conversations. Last night I was knitting and he was telling me the stories of his family and I fell asleep. Because you know when Joel talks, it's like a sound sleep machine. He's like, and then my father took it and wrapped it around me and I'm knitting. I'm like, oh, that's lovely. So the kindness of others, right? Warm meals in beds, right? But even when I think I'm sick of it, look at this. You know, it's beautiful. You're beautiful. Our interaction today is my paycheck of the day. That's my paycheck. I still want paid, but that's my paycheck. Our time. I will go to bed thinking of our time during that precious moment we had together, right? It'll carry me for the month until I get home, right? So that's how I do it. I do kind of understand how rock artists feel, though, because you are exhausted. It is not glamorous. People are like, oh, you went to Nashville and Alabama and Cocoa Beach and Boca Raton and Lauderdale, and I'm like, yeah, and it was hot as hell all the time. But it's you're just moving and constantly recalibrating, and there's nothing. I can see why they take pills to sleep, and I can see why they take pills to get up and do their job, and why they need to feel loved in some way on the road. It's tough, isn't it, Susan? It's a hard life, but it's a goodly, beautiful, phenomenal life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, yeah. So, is that good enough? Okay. That was like all over the place. It's getting late. Anything else? All right, can I sing a song? All right, I'm going to sing a song I heard, and it made me think of my mother. No stone in my head, no flowers on my tomb, no gold-plated sign in a marble-pillared room. The one thing I ask when they lay me in the ground, when I die, tear my still house down. When I was a child, way back in them hills, I laughed at the men who guarded them old stills. But that old mountain shine got a hold of me somehow. When I die, tear my still house down. Oh, tear my still house down. Let it go to rust. Don't leave no place of the hiding place where I made that evil stuff. For all my time and money, no profit did I see. But that old copper kettle was a death on me. Now tell all your children that hell ain't no dream. 'Cause the devil, he lives in my whiskey machine. And in my time of dying, oh, I know where I'm bound. When I die, tear my still house down. Oh, tear my still house down. Let it go to rust. Don't leave no trace of the hiding place where I made that evil stuff. For all my time and money, no profit did I see. But that old copper kettle was a death on me. That old copper kettle was a death of me. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. And please come by for more FGCU storytelling. Next week, we have an open mic on Tuesday, and I'll be telling stories on Wednesday. And then later on April 1st and 2nd, we have Diane Macklin coming in.
Oh, nice.
So stay tuned. It's FGCUstorytelling.com. FGCUstorytelling.com. We have some beautiful things up ahead. And so for my students, we'll be back here next week in the art gallery again. One more time, please, a warm welcome for all the love that she shared with us. Kim Weitkamp.
Joel Ying. Woo! Thanks, everybody. I'll sit here for a little. If you want to talk, come up, chat. That'd be great. Just be polite about the people waiting behind you if there are people. All right?
And you can look her up online, kimweitkamp.com.
Or kimisfunny.com.
Or kimisfunny.com. And
I know.
singer, songwriter, storyteller, everything's there.